Scribble Gen is a set of tools that allow you to make things by drawing, and this video will cover the basics of how to use it and what the presets are in the first release. I'll put a link to the product page in the description. So first off, you want to make sure that you're using version 3.2 or later. Versions earlier than that are not going to work, so make sure you're staying up to date. Now let's talk about how to actually get things into your file. The first way is by appending, second is using the asset browser, and you can also just open the file directly. So let's talk about appending. First off, you're going to want to make sure that you actually downloaded the file, and then you can go to File, Append, and then you can track down the file that you downloaded. I know mine is on the desktop in a folder called Asset Example, and you can see here we have it. Let's just click on that. I'll choose the collection folder, and then we have a collection called Scribble Gen Presets. So let's add that one, click on it and hit append. And now you can see over in the outliner, a bunch of stuff was just added. So if you're gonna append, the way that I like to handle things is just hiding everything that you don't wanna use. So I can hide everything except for the brick wall, and now only the brick wall is here. So that's the first way. Now the other way is using the asset browser. So if you go down to the bottom and create an asset browser or just any new window, you can see that I don't have anything here. And if I click this, we only have current file. So we need to set an asset library. So we can go to Edit, Preferences. Down at the bottom, we have file paths, and then down at the bottom again, we have asset libraries. And I removed mine so that I could show you how to add a new one. So we have nothing right here. We can click this plus button, and you want to set a folder, and this is the folder where you're going to put all your blend files that have things in them that are marked as assets. So I'm going to go to the desktop, and I have a folder right here called Asset Example. I'll click that and add to Asset Library, and I'll click again. And now you can see right here we have a file path, and it ends with a folder called Asset Example. Now we can just close this, come down here to where it says current file, and when we click it, we can actually see that folder that we just added. Click on that, and here are all of the presets now from the first release, and you can basically just drag and drop them like that. Now some of them are using instanced objects, so the instance objects will appear. I'll probably change how this works in future versions, but this is how it works for now, and you can just hide that like that. But yeah, you should be able to basically just drag and drop everything like this and use only what you want. Now the third way is opening the file directly, so I'll do that by going to File, Open, and again just track down the Scribble Gen file and click on it and open it. And so this is what it should look like when you open it. You can see there's a whole bunch of stuff. I have a whole environment set up for us to play with, and this is why I want to use, this file for the example. We also have some directions over here. You can read that to help you get started. I'm just going to hide that for now because I'm just going to explain things to you anyway. And the main way that we're going to be controlling all of our presets is with the Modifier Properties tab. You can see in here we have a whole bunch of options. I'm just going to hide everything in the Scribble Gen presets collection like that, and we're just going to start fresh. So I'm going to start with cables right here. We can just drag that in, and this should give you just one single cable. Basically, you just want to select your object. All of them are going to be curves by default. Then you can hit Tab to go into edit mode and hit T if you don't see this side panel open, and you can see we have an option down here called Draw. That's the one that you're going to want to use that will allow you to actually draw with your curves like that. And we do have some other options. If you hit T and go down to Tools like that, you can see we have Cursor and we have Surface. So I think by default this is set to Cursor. So if you're having a problem where you're trying to draw on the surface and it's just floating in the air, you need to change this to Surface. So you can set it that way, and then it will, cling to whatever you're drawing on. We also have this other option that only works for Surface called Only First. And if we choose that, it will pay attention to where you start and cling to the surface there, but everything else will kind of stick straight out like that. So this is good if you just want to draw a bunch of stuff sticking out of the ground like that, then you can. But for pretty much everything, I'm just going to have this set to Surface. Now let's check out some of these options over here. So if you just hover over anything, you'll see that there are tooltips that should tell you what each parameter does. So if you're ever confused, you can just hover over things to look at the tooltip. Now to get it to interact with your environment, you can scroll down to the Common category, and we have something called Target Collection. This is where you want to put the collection that your environment is in, and you want to make sure that your cable is not in that collection, and because it might cause some errors. Our whole environment right here is in a collection that's called set, like that. So we can make that our target collection. And this will give us access to some options, like we can enable collision. And if we turn that on, it will try to prevent things from going through the floor. I drag it down like that, and it stops at the floor. This might be a little easier to tell what's going on if we turn the radius up. So we can go to the top right here. You can see we have a radius option, and it's just going to make the cable quite a bit thicker like that. So it's also going to sit on top of the floor. When we turn it off, it's just going to ignore the floor completely and pay attention to where we drew it. But we turn it on, this should help keep things from going through the floor. And if it doesn't look right, like if it's going through the floor or if it's too far away, you can play with the offset strength right here to, fix it up a little. I'll just turn collision off for now. We also have another option called snap endpoints, and this only works when you have this target collection set. So we can turn that on, and you can see what happened is this endpoint just reached out and snapped to the surface right here. This end didn't because there's nothing over here for it to snap to. So that's basically what it does, and it's pretty good for if you want something to be like hanging in the corner, then you can move it over here, rotate it, and if it can reach to something nearby that's in this collection, then it will. This is nice for when you want something to always be touching the walls. Endpoints only means that it's only going to pay attention to the start and the end of where you draw. Even if you draw something like a squiggle like this, you can see both endpoints are just going to be touching the wall right there. It's basically just going to ignore everything in the middle. So at the top, we're going to have some common things like size and quality. So we have the radius that you already saw. It's just going to make it thicker. We have resolution, which is how close all of the points are. This is going to affect things like how accurate the collision is, and also if you're using noise, how much detail it can actually have. But if you make the value much bigger, then it will become lower resolution and your computer will be able to handle it a little better, but you won't be able to pack as much detail into it. So keep that in mind. We also have profile resolution. Right now, this has 8 sides. We could turn it down to 3, and now it's triangular like that. So that's what that does. Now, every preset is going to have a specific category that's just for the preset. So this one has cables. You can see we have a material here, default material that comes with the pack. We have X and Y quantity, and we can see what that does. That's just going to add multiple wires going along like that. And we can set it on both axes if we want something to be more square like that. Spacing is just going to push these apart, and twist strength is going to twist them around like that. We also have use curve tilt. So when you see something like that, it's just going to be a toggle, or 1 or 0 on and off. And if you hit T and go into edit mode, you can see that we'll have some options right here for radius and tilt. So tilt is going to allow you to twist things for individual points like that. So if you want to, you can go up here to select and just select a specific point and use the tilt like that. Or you can hit Control T, which is the shortcut for tilt. But if you turn this off, then tilt will no longer work. So if you want access to this, make sure this is on. It should be on by default though. We can also use radius right here. I don't have any explanation for it because I'm not done working on it, but a lot of the time I'll tie the radius to certain parameters. Let's just draw on the cube like that. So when I change the radius here, you're going to see that the edges kind of stick out like that. I made it so that the radius is going to push the endpoints kind of away from the surface so that it looks like they're being plugged in. So if you want things to look like they're being plugged into walls, try messing with the radius. Also, this looks pretty good when you set it to endpoints only. It will look quite a bit cleaner, but you'll have to turn the radius up a little higher. Also, the shortcut for radius is Alt-S. So if you want a whole bunch of cables sticking into things, you can just draw using only endpoints and then Alt-S like that. And there you go. It's a whole bunch of cables sticking out. Now under common, we have a few other options like minimum hang amount and maximum hang amount. So this is going to make sense for if you're trying to make hanging cables. So let's just draw in the corner like that. And you can see by default, there is going to be some hanging like that. And this only works if you have endpoints only turned on. You can see when we turn it off, it doesn't work. But as soon as we turn it on, it will start hanging like that. And the hanging works best when we add some duplicates. So we can scroll down, we have a duplicate section, and we can turn the quantity up like that. This also shows off the material a little, showing that some of the curves randomly will be different colors. But you can see when we have duplicates, each of them will hang a different amount. And that's why there are two values, the minimum and maximum. If you have these set to the same thing, if they're both just like 0.2, all of them will have the same amount. But when you turn it down to 0, it's going to add a hang amount randomly between these two values. All right, so let's look at noise now. We'll just draw a new curve, bring it up. And we do have our duplicates set to 10 right now. And when we turn the strength up for the noise, you can see these will all kind of randomize. We're adding like a noise texture to it. And each curve will be distorted a little differently. So we have W, which is, if you know anything about noise textures, this is basically just going to randomize it. We also have scale and we have detail that you can mess with. So if you want these to be more similar to each other, under duplicates, we have similarity. So by default, it's set to 1, which is basically going to make every curve distort a little differently. But if we turn it to 0, all of them will be distorted the same. And if we turn it up very slowly, you can see kind of what similarity means, how they're kind of following the same direction a little. But as you turn it up, it will become more random. Now let's turn strength all the way down and take a look at random offset right here. So random offset will kind of spread your curves apart like how the noise texture did, except it's not going to distort them, it's just moving them. So you can see as we turn it up like that, they will start to spread apart like that. We also have offset strength. Let's turn this down. Offset strength is good for if you want to make things like fences like that. You can set them for specific axes, X, Y, Z, things like that. And I also have an option for using the normals of the curve. So if we turn that on, instead of just moving up on the Z, it's going to look at the normal direction. So this is going to make a lot more sense when you turn all of them up together. This works best for things like curves, like that, because they'll all kind of follow each other. You can see when we turn this off, you're not going to be able to have them offset based on the direction of the curve. That's what use normals does. And it works best when you have it pushing outward. So, depending on the direction of your curve, if you have it pushing inward, you might get some weird overlapping. So just keep that in mind too. And we also have end pinching, and you can see it says used with duplicates. We can turn the strength up again for the noise. So end pinching does exactly what it says. It's going to pinch the ends. So instead of being all spread out, the ends will come down to a point. So we have pinch size right here. 1 is the default and it means that it's unaffected. But if we turn it down, it will start to pinch the ends closed like this. And if you bring it all the way down to 0, it will be like all going to the same point. So I don't usually like to bring it down this far because they start going through each other like that. But this is good for if you want wires looking like they're being fed into the wall, then you can do that pretty easily. Let's just do that. You can have it something like that. And it looks kind of like they're being fed into the wall this way. And we do have some other pinching options. So start is going to pay attention to where it starts pinching. By default, it's 0, which means the end points. So it's starting to pinch here. But if we turn it up, you'll see that it'll start pinching further down like that. End does the same thing. By default, it's set to 1, which is going to be, the very center. But if we turn that down, you can see it starts to kind of spread out like that. So if you want it to be a really, sharp transition, you can set this to like 0.1 and then select both of them and drag them up at the same time like that. And center is basically moving the center point. So by default, it's going to be halfway through the curve, but we can, move it around like this if you want. And then we have start only, which makes it only, pinch on one side. And we have flip, which is just going to flip the entire thing like that. We also have this output attribute, which is used for the materials, and I recommend just not touching that. But it's basically giving a random value per curve if you want to do something like that with the materials. But that's pretty much all of the basic controls, and you're going to notice that a lot of the presets have very similar controls. So let's bring in hanging cables. We can just drag and drop it like this. This is going to have all of the same options that cables has because it's actually the same thing. It's just that some of these values are a little different. And basically all you have to do is set the target collection, and it will be set up to make hanging cables by default. with all of the values that just work. We actually have an area over here that would probably work pretty nicely for that. There you go. Next we have barbed wire, and this is going to be pretty similar to the cables also. It is going to be real world scale. So if we put this near our character right here, and let's set the target collection like we usually do, and we'll also turn on collision. This will allow us to, you know, kind of compare this to our character in terms of size. This is how big barbed wire, you know, common barbed wire would be compared to a real person. But if you want, we do have an option at the top called overall scale, and this is basically just going to scale everything up, kind of like if you were just going to hit S to scale. It's going to pay attention to the spacing of all of the barbs and keep that proportional. So if you want, you can make it bigger that way. Now we do have separate materials for the barbs and the wires if you want to do that. And we also have the option to set an object for the barbs. So if you want to use an object, you have to turn on the use object option right here, and that will use an instance that we have in here already. But if you want, you can add your own. That's why I put that in here. By default, it's turned off and it just uses one that's created with geometry nodes. Spacing is going to change the spacing of the barbs like that, so you can make them a lot closer if you'd like. We also have barb scale like that. Now we have barb loop count, which is going to be how many times they're wrapped around. You can see we turn it up and they wrap around more times. Let's turn the spacing down for this because it is going to be more apparent what's actually happening. Barb twist is going to rotate all of the barbs a little differently. When we have it set to 0, they should all be, you know, rotated the same amount, but as we turn it up, they will start to rotate a little differently like this. This just makes it look a little more random. By default, it's set to 30 though. And then barb rotation will rotate all of them at the same time like that. Now we have common, which is going to have all the same stuff. We also have noise, and we also have duplicates and end pinching, just like the cables. So duplicates are going to be nice for if you want like a fence or something like that. You can, you know, add one there and then turn duplicates up. I'll just turn it up to 10, and we can change the offset on the Z to go up like that. It's going to look a little weird right here unless you turn on endpoints only. I'll turn hang off completely, and we can also turn the noise up a little bit like that. And we have a barbed wire fence. So let's check out chains. Again, chains are going to be pretty similar to cables. It has a lot of the same options. We have overall scale, which is going to, you know, just scale everything up and pay attention to how close all of the links are to each other. Resolution, I recommend not touching this because this will affect, you know, how close the links are to each other like that. But this is a good option to have for if you want to add your own link that's your own, you know, specific shape. And then you can set this to whatever value it needs to be to make them link properly. We also have the material. We have the scale of them if you want to change the scale of the links individually, and we have twist. So the twist is going to be the difference from one link to the next. You can see these alternate 90 degrees like that, and this is set to 90 degrees. If you set it to 0, it will look pretty broken, but you don't have to turn it up very high for it to start looking a little more natural like that. Now we have all of the common options right here. Hang amount, endpoints only. We have collision, noise, duplicates, and end pinching. So all of that's going to be the same as with the cables and whatnot. And we can add in cobwebs like this. This is my favorite one. So let's set the target collection. You're going to want to make sure that you have a target collection set so that the webs actually branch towards things. But let's go into edit mode, delete this, and go into a corner over here and just draw a line like that. So like I said, it's going to ignore everything in the middle, and it's only going to use the endpoints. And when you draw multiple lines, they should branch out and touch each other like that. We do have our usual options for like the radius. I think it makes sense for this to stay pretty thin, but if you're working with like a really big scene that's not realistic scale, then you might want access to that. Same with resolution. If you draw one of these that's really big, and it has a lot of points, it might be pretty taxing. So if you're going to have a really large scene, I recommend maybe turning the resolution up. If we set this to 0.1, you'll notice that there are fewer branches too. So that's a way to kind of control how many possible branching positions there are. So branch probability is going to change how many possible branches there are. So if we turn this down, you'll see that there are fewer and fewer. And if we set it to 0, it's just going to be the lines that we drew. Now you can turn this up really high, just to 1, if you want it to be very busy like that. Now seed is just going to randomize everything like that. Noise strength is going to change how things branch. It's going to basically spread out the branching. So this makes more sense when we draw something going straight into the ground like that. So let's turn noise strength down to 0, and you can see it's not spread out at all. It's just going straight down. And as we turn it up, it's going to spread out more and more like that. It's basically going to create like a radius around the endpoint and branch out more randomly. Now the scale is just going to change like how random, the branching is, and the same with the detail. It might look a little more chaotic like that. But you can get a lot of coverage from just one curve if you turn the strength up really high. And that'll make it so you don't really have to draw as many lines, I guess. And then we have snap endpoints, which we already talked about, and we have the minimum and maximum hang amount. So we don't have as many options here, but we have the ones that count. Now we can delete this, and the last one we have is brick walls. So let's drag a brick wall in here. You can see we have a material in here by default, and there are actually 2 materials that come with this. We have bricks no mortar, and we do have bricks with mortar also. Now if you're using cycles with optics, then I believe bricks with mortar won't work because it uses ambient occlusion, and I believe optics doesn't support that. The reason I set it to the one without mortar is because the ambient occlusion can be pretty slow sometimes, so I didn't want people to like have their computers crash or whatnot. But know that there is another option in here. Now we have our typical options like overall scale. So you can just, scale this whole thing up if you want. And we have a resolution, which again, I recommend not changing. It's similar to the chains where this is based on the size of the bricks that we're using. Again, I recommend only changing this if you change the shape of the brick that you're using in here, which we can do by just changing the brick collection. And I did want to use a collection in case you want to add multiple bricks. It will kind of randomly pick bricks to put over here. Now flatten makes sense over here. Let's go into edit mode and delete this, and we can draw over on these hills. So when we choose flatten, it's going to make the line be completely flat, and that's good for if you want it to like be level instead of, sticking to the surface like that. Now we can use the curve radius for this. And if we go into edit mode and change the curve radius, you can see that it will make it taller. Now this is only going to pay attention to whole numbers, so it won't change until it gets to 2, like that. But this is a nice option to have because it means you can have walls that are different sizes by hitting Alt-S, and scaling them up separately like that. But we also have an option for height right here, and this is basically just going to add these two together. So if you want everything to be the same height, then you can just set it in here. We have height noise, which is going to randomize the height like that. And then we have scale and detail, which is going to, change the noise that's being used. So if you turn this up much higher, it's going to look a little more random. Same thing with the detail, it's just affecting the noise texture. We also have delete bricks right here, which will start randomly deleting bricks like that. If you turn it up too high, you might have some floating bricks. So I recommend kind of keeping this subtle, like 0.1, 0.15, something like that. Random position is going to make the bricks stick out randomly. So you can see what it's doing right here. And then random rotation will make them randomly rotate on their local z-axis like this, if you want some to be, sticking out like that. And then we have the seed, which will just randomize everything basically. And this is kind of similar to the Cobwebs, where I'm only giving options that I think are necessary, because if you have too many, then it becomes kind of overwhelming and it's easier to break things that way also. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is how to actually export these things. So some of these will not work if you just go to apply like that. You can see that it won't work. And some of them that are using instances won't work either. If you right click and go to convert mesh, you can see when we do that, it just kind of disappears. So If you do want to actually export these, then you have to go into geometry nodes in here, and we'll go to the very, very end. So right before the group output, we want to put a node called realize instances like this, and you can just drop it in like that. Now, one downside is that for the brick wall, this is going to kind of mess up the textures, but it's a necessary step if we want to actually convert this to a mesh. So now we should be able to right click and convert to mesh, and it's still there. And now you can do whatever you want with it. You can go to File, Export, and export it as whatever you want if you're going to like bring it into a game or something like that. So if we wanted, we could do the same thing with Cobwebs. All we have to do with this, because it's not using instances, is convert to a mesh. And now when we go into edit mode, you can see that, you know, it's actually a mesh in here, and we can do whatever we want with it. The only ones that you have to go into geometry nodes to realize the instances are going to be the ones that are based on instances. Like the barbed wire, you'll have to do that for the barbs, which are instances. And for the chains, you'll have to do that because each chain link is instanced. All right, that's pretty much it. I have a lot more presets planned, and as I add new features, the price will go up, but updates will be free for people who already bought it. And if you'd like to report a bug or request a feature, I recommend coming to the suggestions channel on my Discord server, or you can just send me an email. Links for all of those are going to be in the description. Thanks for your support, and have a good one.